this life was all I ever wanted.
I'm not leaving. Not yet.
I was hoping you'd say that.
We gotta hit the streets, make some money.
People like us must destroy people like him. Buckle up.
Get Showtime free at Showtime.com.
We transition away for the moment from Saturday's fights, and we have to get back to this. Jon Jones and Dana White, they're just feuding over and over again. Now, I want to ask a question here, BC, that I was going to pitch to you first, but there was something of an update even since the questions we had put together for today's show. First things first, Jon Jones apparently, if you believe him, and this is certainly up for debate, has relinquished his UFC light heavyweight title. He tweeted over the weekend, I basically have nothing to gain from fighting at 205 at this point. It doesn't do anything for me relative to what I am being paid, right? And so Veni Vidi Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. He's ready to move on. And then you talk to other folks in the know who have spoken to his management, and they say, dude, it's real. Now, again, it's sort of like going back to the Henry Cejudo thing. How real is it? Like, you'll just come back when a better offer is made? Jones has been more explicit about that, I suppose, than Cejudo, who has made grander overtures of departure. Nevertheless, it is a weird time, BC, where these fighters, you know what's so interesting about it? If you go back to 2014, Jones was willing to stump for the UFC and say that they were doing more to create millionaires than boxing. And I don't really want to wade into that debate anymore, but it just seems over time what fighters eventually realize is they're willing to make some sacrifices on the front end for a series of rewards, some might even say promises, on the back end. And then they get to the back end of their career and they realize that bus ain't coming. That ship ain't docking. That train is not coming to this station. Not in the way that they thought it would be. Not saying that they're underpaid in the sense of they're not making good money by objective standards. And then they get kind of angry and then they get sad and they do what Randy Couture did, BC, where they just say, you know what, I'm retiring from my contract, or I'm done, I'm not doing this. And more often than not, UFC usually finds a way to draw them back. So, BC, to start this off, I don't actually think that Jon Jones is done. I want to get to the Deontay Wilder claim in just a second. But on this case of why this is happening, where in 2 different weeks, essentially 3, or I suppose, you have 2 champions almost the same age saying, you know what, I kind of had enough at the current price range. I don't think it's an effective tactic. The UFC doesn't like to be leveraged, and they show when people try, they dig their heels in even harder. But it does underscore what we already know. We already know that these guys are underpaid, and you're seeing this frustration. Where it leads is anyone's guess, but that it keeps happening is not an accident.
No, there's so many layers to this story. I mean, this could be the whole damn show. It goes beyond just a bunch of tweets. Look, is Jon going to give up the title? Well, we'll believe it when we see UFC.com/rankings, Jon's picture off of there. And when we see some type of press release saying, it's over with. I do think he'd be willing to, because he's hit a certain crossroads now that I've been waiting for. I've been waiting for, Luke, a fighter with both leverage and something to lose to make that stand, because you're never going to get a fighter union. You're never going to get balanced pay until somebody with something to lose really makes that stand, and more than one person. I'm sorry, until a group does. Because look, the fighter pay system is broken. There's the haves and the have-nots. And what happens is the haves get rewarded enough, and they'd fought so long to get out of the have-not category, but that's why they're willing to have it announced that they only made $300,000 for their fight, when in reality they made $3-4 million behind the scenes. There's a reason they don't share that publicly or argue for more, because they finally got to that point and they're holding on to it. It's really kind of smart the way UFC controls this and has set it up. But no, it's not right. It's not right, the percentage amount that UFC pays. It's not right when you compare a top-end UFC fighter to someone on the boxing side who, let's say, more often than not is fighting lesser competition yet making more. It's not fair when you compare it to NBA, NFL, and etc. So somebody's got to take a stand to make it work. The problem for Jon right now is that, as Dana had said, it is the worst possible time to make this stand. UFC, according to Dana, is scheduled to lose upwards of $100 million this year without having a live gate. That lack of a live gate is going to prevent any type of super fights from happening. So it is very likely that Jon doesn't fight again this year at all and waits for 2021, maybe February 1st, 2021, when we can get people back into stadiums and arenas and have those type of big fights. I'm hoping, though, just like I'm hoping that all this craziness going on in our real life news cycle will lead to broader change, we're going to need more fighters making this stand, because 1,000% Jon Jones should be getting a lot more. Dana can't in one breath say, like Jon had said, that he's the greatest of all time and he's all these things, and then once Jon, chirps up, crack down on him. But I did mention there's layers and elements to this, Luke. UFC's put themselves in a tough spot. They bend the rules, so to speak, and choose not to extra punish fighters of late when mishaps happen. Conor throwing the dolly through the window. Well, the criminal system could take care of it because we got to make a big payday at 229. How about Jon Jones with the DUI and weapon? How about Jon Jones with the USADA issue, in December 2018, where they moved that card during Christmas week, in such unprecedented manners. They've done things to protect him for the sake of making more money. And now when that person says, hey, I deserve more money, they're going to say, oh, sorry, Jon, you're reckless and screwed up. Well, do you think there's any enabling in that system, Luke, where I think that overall who's winning this argument, who has a greater point, I still think it's Jon.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point about moving that card at the last minute, it's like, did the UFC do this in a way that totally accommodated Jon for the second Gustafsson fight? There could be no argument otherwise. Of course they did. Did they also do that because they wanted to make a shitload of money? Of course they did. I'm not even really mad at either of those considerations, but the idea that it was some kind of like altruistic effort on the part of UFC to really do a solid for Jon Jones, I'm less inclined to buy that interpretation of it. And you said something, though, that I really disagree with, which is, well, there's haves and have-nots. Well, there is in terms of who is able to have a comfortable life versus not a comfortable life, right? You even see certain fighters on the undercard, which, by the way, had a tremendous amount of finishes and great fights on Saturday, saying I could really use this money because I want to do this full time, or, I've been living in the gym, or I've got some various form of hardship. In that sense, there's haves and have-nots. But let's just be clear about it. They're all have-nots, right? You can't say that 18% that's being shared is somehow going effectively and appropriately to all of them, or to a portion of them, and then not. It's an underpayment generally. And honestly, this was the original question. Dana White was saying over the weekend that he wanted Jon Jones Deontay Wilder money, and he doesn't deserve Deontay Wilder money. To which I say, I don't know, D-dubs. He actually might, right? Here's the point. It's actually your A-listers in the UFC that, in terms of aggregate dollars, BC, they're the most underpaid of all. If you add up who has generated the most revenue, and in a different sport, let's say what that would have been, the share they would have gotten versus what they've actually been paid, there's no argument that the most underpaid is the A class. We always think of it as the bottom class. But if there was a fighters union, they would just create certain protections to raise their standard of living, enable them to have a more comfortable lifestyle. But to the point, they are somewhat interchangeable. It's the top stars that generate the most that are the most underpaid by far. It's a big misconception. So the question is he entitled to Deontay Wilder money? Now, the reason why Deontay makes what he makes is a function of the fact that he has, in many cases, at least over the course of his career, had multiple bidders kind of edging his purse up. When he fought Breazeale and knocked him out inside of a round, he fought on Showtime, but it was just on TV. There was a bit of an arms race that was trying to secure his services, and that inflated a little bit. But here's the point. Before he even really made a real jump to pay-per-view, he made between 13 to 18 million for that fight, and that was just on linear television. The idea that Jon Jones, whatever he's making, let's say $5 million, which is what he indicated on Twitter, was what he was getting over fight over fight, is what he should be getting, is ludicrous, totally ludicrous. He has been a bigger draw on pay-per-view for nearly a decade relative to what Deontay Wilder has done. Matter of factly, now not every fight has been a blockbuster, but every big pay-per-view, there's very few of them, I think two, that Wilder has had, Jones has matched and then exceeded. So not only is the rate over time not been great, all the money added up that he's not been paid, that he could have been paid under a different system, makes $30 million a bargain, BC.
It does. And look, to defend the UFC in a small point, the difference between boxing and MMA, look, UFC's got loaded, for the most part on pay-per-views, somewhat loaded cards in which they have to pay those people. You don't get that same quality below a Deontay Wilder on a pay-per-view card in boxing. We understand that. But yes, the system is broken. And if UFC is going to have a lot of discussion and explaining to do in the future, Luke, if more fighters are willing to take this stand. Jon's always been a little bit of an outlier I think it always goes back to that UFC 152 situation with the Dan Henderson fight and his refusal to take Chael on short notice. That was his first stand, and we don't see fighters take those stands, Luke. So I'm hoping this is a step toward the direction of UFC reconfiguring their financial model and feeling out how they're going to better reward these guys. And I do, by the way, think there is a have and have nots, and that's why the haves don't argue. That's why because they work so hard to get there, but they do deserve more at that highest level. Luke, from the question and standpoint of what happens next, I mean, I could see them overpaying Jon to fight a Jan Blachowicz of that group of respected 205 contenders. Probably the best matchup for Jon to win, in his style somewhat handily. And maybe then Jon sits out to move to heavyweight in 2021. But if Jon sits out the rest of the year and does give up the title, look, this is the kind of the move we wanted for him. And I'm kind of happy that he's realizing that there's not a ton to gain outside of a consistent paycheck in staying at 205 and fighting these younger, hungry guys. Luke, how much do you think, this is an extension of a question from last week, Jon's, small decline with age is playing into UFC's hard stance right now?
Got to be part of it. Absolutely, no doubt about it. There's a thought in my mind that they're sort of reading the tea leaves here and they're wondering what I've seen. If I can see it on tape, I suspect that they've got experts who know far more than me in their ear kind of saying to the same things like there might be something of a decline. I mean, remember the guys, like the earlier you start is the earlier you finish in terms of your athletic life. That's especially true in fighting. Now on the 30 mil part, very quickly, I don't think there's even any way under an ideal circumstance to get Jon 30 million because the business model doesn't have multiple suitors bidding up his purse. And so as a consequence, that's not realistic, but more than what he's getting is basically what he's asking for. I do think that they could find a way to get that, but you're right, BC. What's happening here is he's like at a point now where he's like, I could fight Jan, who's going to be a tough fight and make decent money, but it's going to be hard. It's going to go probably 5 rounds. It's going to be difficult. If I'm going to do this kind of thing, I want to get paid. And UFC's looking at this and saying, your defense is great. Your offense is not what it once was. Why do we want to invest a ton of money for just that? But that's why he needs some kind of other mechanism in the market to help his value in terms of what he brings to the financial table to make sure that he's rewarded effectively. And right now, I think we could both agree that mechanism, whether it's the Ali Act, a union, whatever, it's just not there.
And in closing, if Jon also is feeling a little bit of that, right? Age piling up, the other guys getting closer. It's not impossible that he's starting to plan a 2 to 3 fight exit strategy, right? Where if I, maybe I don't fight 2-3 times a year like I did coming off of that USADA suspension where I wanted to make a ton of money and prove to everybody that I'm back. Maybe now I be more selective, and really aim for super fights only. Not a bad business strategy either.
Not a bad business strategy at all. I also wonder, lastly, I know it's very different, BC, and we'll move on to UFC 250 here in just a second. I wonder how much of what St. Pierre did, going away, coming back, and then dropping the title again, I wonder how much that spooked him, because it did create for one magical evening that night when he fought Bisping. And that wasn't just that fight. That card in general was pretty good there in New York City. I was there. I think
that might be the best card. Luke, that might be the best card ever. All right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was a tremendous, tremendous event, but then there was nothing to build on. There was nothing to go from after St. Pierre did what he did. I wonder if they worry, if we just accommodate these fighters in their latter stages of their career where they're still actually really, really good, but they've got their eye on the exit and they want a bunch more money and they're harder to deal with. How much of that business do we really want to be in versus everyone who's kind of in their late 20s, early 30s, who's a little bit, and now Jon's in that late 30s or early 30s stage, but I mean, it's sort of the guys who haven't had superstardom all the way up through that time. How much of that business do we want to be in, especially now with they're $100 million less in the pandemic? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's a sort of an existential question that the UFC is kind of facing at this time.
This life was all I ever wanted.
I'm not leaving. Not yet.
I was hoping you'd say that.
We gotta hit the streets, make some money.
People like us must destroy people like him. Buckle up.
Get Showtime free at Showtime.com.